end. Our presenters today are Thane from Continuous and Keenan from FULLPRESS. Gentlemen, please go off mute. And Thane, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, and thanks for joining everyone. Super excited to share what we're about to show today. Keenan and I have been working on this for quite some time, so I think it's really a testament to kind of show what the future of revenue lifecycle management looks like and um, generating sales via headless via Slack. But then how do we actually make that book, bill, and ultimately recognize in NetSuite? So I know we promised a lot of live demoing today, so we just have just two slides to go through, and then we're just going to jump right into the demonstration. Um, so just before I start, just a brief introduction to myself. My name's Thane. I lead solution engineering at Continuous. Been in the quote to cash space for a little over a decade now, working with Salesforce and NetSuite. So super excited to share with what we got today. Keenan.
Yeah, thanks, Dane. My name's Keenan. I'm the tech duo co-founder at FULLPRESS. Been focused pretty much purely on what that future revenue stack looks like through Revenue Cloud as your revenue platform, especially plugged in through headless channels, kind of meeting your users where they want to be met in terms of interacting with their tech stack. So yeah, excited to chat today.
Cool. And just last slide, kind of give you a high level of what we're going to show today. Keenan's going to take the first part of the demonstration and really show, what a future headless revenue lifecycle looks like. And then from the continuous side, just we have our application continuous control, which is native to Salesforce and NetSuite. So after Keenan kind of shows all that headless configuration in Slack, I'll take over and then kind of show exactly how we actually use the continuous control application to settle those transactions and revenue in NetSuite. All right, Keenan, I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Sounds good. Let me go ahead and share my screen up here. Cool. Looks like it's coming through. All right, so we're going to be walking through this process through Slack today. I'll be switching over to Salesforce to actually show the data landing, but the idea here really is, again, going headless from a user experience and user interface perspective and allowing your users to interact with their tooling in the systems that they're spending their time in, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about why Slack here in a minute. I got us started in this deal channel. So the way this is structured is we have a distinct channel for each of our, accounts and pursuits. I got us started here by saying that I, was on a call with Bryce here. He's the CTO, added him as a contact. Our agent went ahead and added Bryce as a contact for us and gave us a link in Salesforce. And so now we could progress this by saying, Bryce mentions they are interested in the, complete API solution. Can you help me build out a quote for that? And the idea here is we're mentioning our agent in the channel when it makes sense, when we have a request for it. And the idea of this all being in a channel is it gives us the ability to weave in interaction with colleagues, with my SE or other account managers, so that it's not just sitting inside of a chat one-on-one with an agent, but I can also, uh, spread this information and spread this conversation with other people that I might be working with. So here we can see, we'll make the thread a little bit bigger. I went ahead, kind of built this out for me. It's recommending a 3-year ramp deal. So, maybe I'm a newer rep and I'm just understanding like, hey, why are we recommending this? Um, so we can go ahead and just ask the question. And the idea here is this is plugged into our business context through an MCP of, my business. And so it has my rules of engagement. It has my standard practices and processes, all this type of stuff. So it's effectively like a sales ops agent with that full business context, full rule of engagement context. So it can guide users down the right path and push back where necessary. Users can push back where necessary and kind of create those guardrails for you so that it's not just a blank check effectively for the user. So here it's telling me, this is kind of the standard approach from an adoption curve perspective, lower year one cash outlay, all these types of things, right? So we can just say, yeah, let's do it. and it'll go ahead and go through our process here of building out our quote for us. And so while that's running, just to speak a little bit more to the design decision of why we're doing this in Slack, and specifically a Slack channel. So there's a lot of different ways that our customers at FULLPRESS have wanted to investigate this headless, revenue stack motion. We've had customers who wanted their users to just be able to do this in Claude or in ChatGPT or Codex. And we've also had users who, wanted to do this in Agentforce inside the org. And those are all great options. And, what's done here from an architecture perspective with that kind of business context MCP, using the Revenue Cloud APIs to process these transactions can be done anywhere. We early on in FULLPRESS, we actually did an embedded deployment that was just going to WhatsApp for people. That was back in the CPQ days. So the idea here is putting this in Slack in a channel gives you a true co-pilot that's engaged in all of your conversations. One of our initial design customers, and we were going down this path, had a 18-month long sales cycle, right? Multiple levels of approval, multiple SEs, all this type of stuff engaged, to sell a deal. And it wasn't a simple, transaction. It required a lot of different stakeholders. And so the idea here is by threading all of these interactions with the agent, once this is done here, I can go ahead and I can mention Thane, like, does this look good commercially? Any issues on billing, things like this. And Thane can just plug directly into the channel, take a look, all this type of stuff and engage with this, in the middle of my thread. And when I'm ready to re-engage the agent for a next step, I could do so. So looking at the response here, it took a minute because it was building out all that ramping for me. Gives me a little talk track if I want to draft something back or if I want to send an email through like a Gmail MCP or something like that, I could do so. Goes ahead and shows me my deal structure in a table. And now another big advantage to doing this in Slack is Slack's bolt architecture, which basically means if I want my reps to understand what they can do, I can actually build UIs for them so that they can understand what their levers and capabilities are. One disadvantage to just cutting someone loose on a natural language, input mechanism like directly in Agentforce or directly in Claude is they might not know what tools they have, right? They might just be sitting there asking questions, understanding, hey, I want to add a discount, but the system's designed to discount in like 5 different ways, right? So the nice thing about doing this in Slack again with that bolt architecture is if I want to give my user the ability to add a discount, I could just create a little modal, right? I want to add a discount. Okay, what kind of discount do you want to add? Do you just want to do a whole percentage off the top? Do you want to override the total and we, use a discount distribution system in Revenue Cloud to back in based on weighting? All these different things, right? Same thing with giving your user the next best actions. Like here, we're guiding them. Do you want to submit for approval? Do you want to view the breakdown? Which again, you could build a little modal in Slack so they can just have a view into the quote. Or do you want to go ahead and like open that in Salesforce so you can view it there? So now you can see my quote pops up, loading my quotes for me, fully ramped. I have these 3 years, have my quantities ramping, all that kind of stuff. Little discount on the one of the products here. So when I'm ready to move on to the next stage, again, I have these next best actions. We can go ahead and submit for approval. And you can see that can even start another thread, right? Because maybe this approval is going to take steps, going to take iteration. One of the approvers is going to ask for validation. Why are you doing this? All that kind of stuff. So we can just have a thread here. In my case, I approved automatically because we only have so much time. But if you wanted to then go ahead and go back and forth with Thane on, why are my commercials being scrutinized, all these types of things, you can do that in the context of the thread. And then those approvers can approve or reject, or you could recall, or all those types of things directly there so that everything is kind of compartmentalized. If I want to go ahead and take a look at my order form, I could actually hit the Omni Studio API and actually surface that document generation directly in Slack. So I don't have to go into Salesforce, click a button, download a PDF locally, pop it open and view it. I can just hit the thread with the document, take a look at it, see if it looks good, maybe there's issues, maybe I'm missing an address or something like that, and I could get that rectified before I decide to push that out for signature. Lastly, when I'm ready, let's say that that gets signed, we can go ahead and create our order here, and then that will go ahead and spin up another thread for my order ops team to go through their validation of this deal. And then it's up to you from a business process perspective if you want this to happen, before closed one or maybe as a step prior to closed one or at closed one or what have you. But it's going to build the order out for me. And you could even put a little button in here if you want to just activate the order directly from Slack without having to go in and do that as well. The idea here that I'm kind of trying to illustrate is all of these different actions in Revenue Cloud, they have dedicated APIs. And so it's up to you what you want to build guardrails around from a user experience perspective inside the system versus what you just want to expose in a headless way to specific audiences, right? But really this full end-to-end revenue lifecycle, you could do directly in this headless motion. So now you can see in that order thread again, we activated it. I have my billing schedules, assets got created. That's all awesome. We could even go ahead and hit that generate invoice API in Revenue Cloud with that next best action. And it'll go ahead and actually create my invoice for me for that initial invoice. And again, if you want to append that PDF directly to the Slack thread, you could do so, right? So we can surface the invoice here. We can app mention, maybe an AR analyst or someone from the billing team to take a look before it gets posted, all these types of things, right? So everyone can live in this one system in Slack. We can surface the outputs to specific groups of users, app mention specific users, and they can actually take action directly here. Or pop out to the system if there's something specific they want to look at, right? So, hey, I want to take a look at this invoice before I post it because, that seems a little crazy. So we can take a look at the invoice lines here, see how everything is structured and staged, so on and so forth. I can go ahead and see that little invoice document getting generated. Everything is kind of as it should be in expectation. And then I can also see that document surfaced here. So this is kind of end-to-end new business, being able to flow through that whole process. But what if my customer wants to do an add-on or midterm modification? There's a couple different ways you can do that. What I've shown here is us being, reactive to some signal from a customer or a conversation. And we could continue that train of thought by saying, hey, customer wants to add on 5 additional APIs. Can you build me the amendment? And again, like I've been saying this whole time, we find the right API. That's a tool for our agent. And it's going to go ahead and go through that process and start building that amendment out for me. I want to show an additional option, which is us not necessarily being reactive to information that we're receiving from a customer, but also being proactive to maybe product telemetry signals or proactive to intent signals that we're seeing from, Marketing Cloud or something like that. And that's where if we pop over here, you could see in this other example, we can get usage telemetry alerts directly into Slack as well through, another agent or another tool or another MCP, all these different options, right? And that's going to give us the ability to just hit the channel immediately if we break a certain threshold based on burn rate, all these types of things, and tell us immediately, hey, it's time to top up, or we want to add on more credits, or here's the recommended action that you take based on how they're consuming. Right. So you have options here. Not everything has to be reactive and user driven. You can also surface those insights, whether it's an amendment like this, or maybe it's a renewal like this, and where, 120 days out or 160 days out, and we just want to hit the channel and say, hey, time to start thinking about this, right? We reviewed everything they're doing, and here's what we suggest you offer them as a renewal package. Right, kind of showing the signals and kind of how they're burning down, all this type of stuff. So depending on what you're selling, depending on how you are building your deals and structuring things, you have different options of how, proactive and predictive you want to be around those types of existing business transactions. And Slack is a great place to do it because your users are already living here, right? They're already maybe receiving their call updates, their daily plans, their to-do lists, they're interacting with their coworkers and maybe even their customers. And then at the same time, they're getting hit with, this customer's overburning, this customer's ready to renew, all these types of things, right? So reeling it back into our amendment here, you can see it went ahead and built that amendment out for me, went ahead and surfaced some information for me. You can see it's breaking down how we're adding things on, doing some proration. We can go ahead and open that in Salesforce and take a look at that actual amendment. And we can see here, adding on 5 quantity to our additional API. Looks like we have a prorated value here based on the remainder of the year 1. And then it's, adding on at the full value for year 2 and year 3. And again, right, guiding the user towards their next action. What do you want to do? And we can even have, designated order forms through Omni Studio for amendments versus new business. So if you want to show the customer like specifically what's changing, hey, we're not making any changes here, but we're adding on 5 of these. So it's very direct and prescriptive to your customer, and they're not just getting an order form for 5 and not really seeing the narrative of everything else. So that's just simple, dynamic document generation that we can do in Revenue Cloud, and a core capability of the platform that's just keeping your users and your customers more in tune with what's happening. But then we can flow this one through the same process. We'll go ahead and create an order here. I don't think I have to submit for approval, but we'll see if I get stopped. We can go ahead and activate that order. And we'll go ahead and generate that invoice as well. And then we'll take a look at the assets real quick before we turn it over to Thane, just so we can kind of show you and visualize what this all means from a, entitlement perspective inside of Revenue Cloud. Let's generate this invoice. And then let's go ahead and take a look at our accounts and the assets now that the dust has settled from all these transactions. So now we're back on our account here. We can see that contact we initially created, Bryce, and we have 2 opportunities. And so if we go down to our orders, we have our 2 orders. And if we take a look at our billing schedules, we have these various billing schedules, and we have these invoices as well. If we pop over to the assets, this is where I kind of want to talk about what that ramping means, right? I mentioned we did a 3-year ramp. When we looked at the actual thread back up here, we saw that it broke it down into 3 distinct tables for us. And that's because in Revenue Cloud, when we ramp, it's giving us the ability to define pricing and packaging, discounting and negotiation levers by specific segments. So that could be a 3-month free period at the front end of your quote for some competitive buyout or something along those lines, or maybe just a stub period where you're doing some heavily discounted portion, or it could just be changes year over year based on, like you see here, adoption or something along those lines. But if we take a look at what that really means behind the scenes here, we'll take a look at our API access request products. And if we look at the asset lifecycle, we can actually see the step-ups visualized, not only in quantity, but also in MRR, ARR, whatever other metrics you want to look at this data through. And we only have a single asset action. It's just the initial sale. But if we look at the asset state periods, we can actually see native snapshotting of kind of point-in-time revenue data. So this gives you the ability to do that type of point-in-time. What's my ARR as of Jan 1, 2028? That's under contract. Combine that with my renewal pipeline and what's forecasted for that period in time. And you don't have to do those types of analytics in a data warehouse or a BI tool anymore. You actually have this type of native snapshotting built into the system that gives you better intelligence around what's under contract. How does that tie to my billings? And then what does that look like combined with my renewal forecast, for example? The other way that these asset state periods can be impacted is through, like I just showed, that midterm modification scenario. So if we look at that additional API, now we actually have 2 asset actions. Not only do we have the initial sale, but we also have that upsell in quantity of 5. And that's giving us the ability to, again, depict that change visually, but also retroactively modify those asset state periods based on the change. So now I can see where it was initially 3 single-year asset state periods. I now have one for like 6 months and some change. I'm not going to do the math. And then it ends, and then we get a new asset state period for that coterminous period, right? And so down here, the fourth one. So that's giving us the ability to keep that point in time, snapshotting up to date. So when we run that, what's my ARR by cohort, by quarter, these types of reports natively, that data is kept fresh. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here. Thane, I've kind of ran through the new biz and the amend side. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so we can look at how this lands not only in NetSuite, but how it gets there through continuous.
Yeah, that was awesome. I don't think I've ever I know a common request always is do I have to log into Salesforce? And I think you just showed that hey, we can actually go all the way to quote to bill to asset all right from Slack. That's so awesome. So what happens from the finance side? We had these billing schedules, we had invoices created, but we actually need to do revenue recognition and how do we make sure that everything's going to settle correctly in our general ledger in NetSuite. And I'm actually going to pick up right on that initial order that Keenan had went through. And here we've got our ramp deal for the API access request for the 100, 200, 300. And with continuous, what we actually do, we can see that this order's been activated, the assets have been generated, but we haven't actually synced anything over to NetSuite yet. And with continuous, we actually provide one simple API call and a corresponding suite app in NetSuite to actually synchronize over all of those records that have been generated out of Salesforce Revenue Management. So if I go ahead and click book order here, it's actually going to go ahead and start synchronizing all of those with the native Salesforce and NetSuite app. And one thing to call out here is that we actually uh, link directly with the native Salesforce contract. So that's going to be the housing mechanism for all of those managed assets and actually that order form that ultimately gets signed by the customer. But what we actually do is we actually sync this over directly to what we call an ARM contract or an Agent Force Revenue Management contract directly in NetSuite. So what we're looking at now in NetSuite is actually a one-to-one replica of all of those orders and order line items that have been processed from Salesforce. And here we can actually see we've got our API access requests, our 100, 200, 300 actually being ramped. And what the NetSuite app for continuous control does is we actually take the raw data output that comes from Salesforce Agentforce Revenue Management and group this into a way that NetSuite will understand. And if you have customers that are using advanced revenue management on NetSuite, this works natively with that. But a common request we get from the finance side is great, we have this ramp deal, but you really sold 600 API access requests. So a common request is really that's one performance obligation or POB with the customer for the full 600. And so what we'll do is we'll actually consolidate that into one obligation with the customer here. Again, this will work natively with NetSuite Advanced Revenue Management. But we also have a lightweight tool that works with standard revenue schedules from NetSuite. So if we look at our total quantity here for the 600, if I take a look into that performance obligation, this is actually how we're grouping all of that revenue data from Salesforce, the booking, the billing, and ultimately the invoices. So here we can see we've got all of those order line items automatically added. And the discounts are reflected here. So as a finance user, you just have this data coming into NetSuite, trusted, accurate, directly from Salesforce via continuous. And if we actually take a look at our revenue recognition, we can see our native revenue plans and native revenue schedules in NetSuite. And a common request is, hey, we want to spread out that revenue for the entire duration of that period for that 3 month or that 3 year deal. So we actually are able to do that automatically by marking this obligation as an even spread. And what that's going to do is it's going to automatically update our revenue schedules to spread that amount evenly over the duration of the 3 year contract. So here we can see we've actually taken that 750 every month and we're actually creating native journal entries directly in NetSuite, directly in our period. So what this allows you to do is really close the books extremely fast because it's directly tied into the NetSuite general ledger. And what's really awesome about the performance obligation here is that uh, Salesforce is actually doing all of that complex billing calculation. So, hey, how much should be billed in year one? How much should be billed in year two? And we're actually mirroring that billing schedule group directly in NetSuite. So you're able to see, how much has been billed so far, how much is pending billing, when's our next billing date. All of this is directly surfaced native sync from Salesforce to NetSuite. So here we can see we've got our billing schedule. We can see that we've billed for that first year from that invoice that Keenan created in Slack. And what we're actually doing as well is we actually link over all of that invoice that was generated out of Salesforce directly into a native invoice directly inside of NetSuite. So all of your GL impacting transactions will happen automatically in NetSuite, with Salesforce being the source of truth for the billing engine. Additionally, if the customer or you have more complex revenue recognition requirements, we can actually directly work with NetSuite Advanced Revenue Management for more complex things like standalone selling price and allocations. Um, but additionally, what we're able to do here, because we have all this information surfaced in NetSuite, is we can actually see, hey, for this ramp deal, for those API requests, how much was actually booked, from those activated orders? How much have we billed for so far? And how much revenue have we actually recognized? So you get a clear window and picture into an individual obligation with the customer directly in NetSuite. So if I jump back into our contract here, again, we can get a clear picture of this entire contract. So what's the entire value of the contract? How much is remaining? What's been billed so far? And if I want to look at this at a header level view, we can actually see, at a contract level, how much has been booked, billed, and recognized so far. And then ultimately, we can kind of see at an individual obligation level, you know, some of these are just our standard straight line revenue recognition. Some of these are percent complete for that SOW type product. So we can say, hey, from a PSA tool, here's how much that project has completed. So we can actually integrate directly with a PSA tool to kind of pull that percent complete. The delivery for training. And then additionally for event-based rev rec, we can actually take in direct usage events and process them that way. So kind of jumping back into Salesforce for a moment here. If I look at our contract here in Salesforce, there's a couple things. So we actually mirror over that exact same view right on the contract in Salesforce. So a common use case we kind of hear for this is, hey, the commissions should actually only happen on revenue recognition. So this way, your finance team has trusted and accurate information and billing details and revenue details happening right inside of NetSuite, but that information is synchronized back into Salesforce so it can be used for downstream and upstream activities like commissions, and you can get a window into what is the actual status of this contract from a revenue summary perspective. So with that amendment that occurred, there was actually the additional 5 API calls. So again, the way that continuous works is it works the exact same way, whether that's a net new deal, an amendment, or an order or a renewal. And so here we've got our activated order, using that exact same modification. So here we've got our quantity increase of 5 API calls for the full 3 years. And very similarly here, we have this button to kind of show this happening, but we do have an API call directly that can be hit, via Salesforce Flow or other native configuration in Salesforce to actually go generate all those records in NetSuite. So after that sync has occurred for that amendment, I can actually look at that same contract in NetSuite, and if I take a look at the order number here I can see that I've got my additional 5 API with that prorated amount that Keenan had showed via that amendment process. And if we take a look at that performance obligation with the customer for the additional APIs, what we're actually able to see is we've got a full ledger of order adjustments that have happened. So your finance team who may want to live in NetSuite is going to get that clear picture and window and visibility into those booked and activated orders. And this can ultimately be the source of truth to ultimately drive, revenue recognition and the books on the NetSuite side. So here I can see I've got my prorated amount for the remainder of the year. And then I've got my full amount for those additional 5 APIs that were booked for the remainder of that 3-year contract. And then what we've done is we've actually automatically updated our revenue plan and our revenue schedule. So here you can see we've actually recognized just for the first amount of those API calls, but then starting in June and July, there was that 5 increase. So we've actually automatically adjusted all of those future revenue schedules so that you're recognizing the most up-to-date and most accurate revenue recognition that you can from all of those amendments and adjustment orders that have happened. And again, we get that full window and visibility into, how much has been booked, how much has been billed, and how much has been recognized. And then finally, from a billing perspective, again, we have all of that billing schedule information that's been synced over from Salesforce Agentforce Revenue Management. So we get a clear window and visibility into how much is still remaining, when's the next invoice going to be generated, and then additionally, we actually link over those invoices. So here was that original invoice line item for the initial order, and then there was that additional invoice that was generated for that amendment, and we actually linked that as well. So we have our native invoices that are getting generated, and synchronized over from Salesforce via continuous into native invoices and transactions in NetSuite. So finally, just to kind of end on that final visibility and view here. So again, we're going to link over any adjustments or amendments or renewals that happen via Slack, via that Headless Agentforce Revenue Management, so you can kind of see all of the orders and adjustments that have happened over time. And again, since we're one-to-one linked with the contract and Salesforce, we get that full visibility here. We can kind of quickly see where we're trending from a booking, billing, and revenue recognition perspective. And we actually synchronize these back from NetSuite into what we call an obligation here, and what we're actually able to kind of see, hey, what's been booked so far, what's been billed, and what's been recognized for each of those individual products or obligations that we have from a contract perspective with our customer. And just a final piece here, just to kind of show what continuous sort of looks like on an administrative side and a configuration side. It is a managed package in Salesforce that gets installed directly into your Salesforce environment, and all of that corresponding data model that you saw in NetSuite would get installed via Suite app to a NetSuite environment. And it comes pre-built with all of those mappings that you had seen. But you can very simply adjust those, add more. We can adjust those object mappings. But really, this is a pre-built plug and play integration from Salesforce Agentforce Revenue Management to NetSuite. And whether you work with NetSuite standard revenue functionality, or you're using NetSuite Advanced Revenue Management, the continuous Suite app will work natively with both of those. So I think that does it from a demonstration perspective. I know we covered a ton of ground really quickly, but definitely wanted to just kind of recap. And we went from a Slack message, to an order form, to an invoice, all the way to revenue recognition in NetSuite. and having that fully automated from start to finish. So I know we wanted to leave some time here. I'm sure there was some questions, and happy to answer and open the floor. And if Keenan, if you wanted to add anything before, but happy to open the floor for Q&A.
Yeah, I'll just say that that booking, billing, recognition view at the individual obligation level, summarized to the contract, summarized to the account is something that, we hear every controller and CFO that we work with, want. That's like their nirvana state, is having that visibility kind of, with immediate access and not having to do a bunch of analysis and all this type of stuff on that. So yeah, that's really cool. I think that's a huge value add.
Well, thank you both. I think everyone is probably just as impressed as I am with some of the stuff that you guys showed. So we did get a couple questions in here, and some of these I think were covered in the discussion. So maybe let's just double click on them while we have a couple minutes. The first one is this real time or a scheduled sync between the systems? And that's the Salesforce to NetSuite systems that they're referring to.
Yeah, great question. So what I demoed today was actually like a point in time. So we launched it right when we clicked it. It can be done immediately after order activation. Um, we do send over that entire payload in one click, and then NetSuite will actually process that entire payload. But we actually, it's really up to, kind of what the volume we would need to sync over to NetSuite. So we need to respect the Salesforce APIs and the NetSuite APIs. So we can do it either way. We can send it over as a point in time with one API call, or if you wanted to say, hey, let's take all of our activated orders on a 10-minute schedule or a 5-minute schedule, we can call that same API that way.
Very nice. All right, what else do we have here? Okay, so I think this one might be more for Keenan, but when the headless component and how it comes into play, is that exclusive to Salesforce or Agentforce, or can this work on CPQ or Salesforce billing? Where does this operate?
Yeah, good question. So, kind of two questions. So first on the agentic component, no, it's agnostic, and it kind of comes, it's a design decision ultimately of how you want your users interacting with it, what your North Star vision is for that type of, embedded agentic workflow in your revenue stack. So Agentforce is definitely a solution that can handle this both inside of Salesforce or, surface through something like Slack or some other embedded deployment if you wanted to. Um, and, building those actions, connecting the correct tools, standard Agentforce development. You could also do this through an LLM, of your choice, right? So what I walked through here was actually a Slack app with the Claude API behind it. And the reason why I went down that path is because it gives me the ability to use, direct Claude tools like subagents, workflows, slash commands, all this type of stuff directly inside of Slack that are connected to my, enterprise Anthropic deployment, my default Claude MD Markdown, right? And you can also do the same thing with OpenAI as well, right? So the model doesn't really matter. It really depends more from a design decision, how you want your users engaging, what that North Star looks like, and what you all want connected to it, things like that. That's really how you pick. We are also an Anthropic partner at FULLPRESS, so we do a lot of the Claude stuff, and so that's just comfortable for me. When it comes to the CPQ and billing piece, yeah, we've actually been working with a couple of our customers on this currently. It is definitely possible to do with CPQ and billing. Salesforce has actually, built out some Agentforce components for CPQ specifically that I've seen that function pretty well, and we've also built some things out for a couple of our other customers. So it is possible. I will say where the big differentiator is, CPQ is a quoting light subscription management tool, and billing is a dedicated billing tool. Revenue Cloud is more of a revenue platform, is the way that we like to envision it at FULLPRESS. And what you get with that is all these dedicated APIs for, every action that you could want to take on that revenue journey. And so that lends itself very well to these types of like agentic deployments, right? Because we have like every tool in our arsenal to build these specific actions and give the agent these tools where, if my user says, I don't want to ramp this. I want it to be a 1 year deal. The customer's pushing back. Like there's an API to undo this ramp feature. We don't have to go through a UI. We don't have to build something new. All these types of things, right? Preview invoice and API. So many tools. When you go down the CPQ and billing path, you're kind of hamstrung in that way. There are some, CPQ and billing APIs that exist. They're a bit more rigid, a bit harder to work with. They definitely don't cover all of the bases like the Revenue Cloud ones do. And so you're kind of stuck in this middle ground where you're doing like direct, DML transactions and then trying to layer some automation behind the scenes. And it just gets not scalable very quickly. And so that's why, we typically try to push our customers towards the Revenue Cloud path just because it unlocks all the doors and it is truly like agentic ready from a platform perspective.
Okay. So I think that's really good points. And then one of the other questions that came up was who manages this? I mean, this seems like it crosses over so many different functions.
Yeah. So I'll say from a headless perspective, the management is typically falling to the RevOps teams for our customers. 90% of what you saw, maybe 95% of what you saw, is effectively two things. It's a list of pre-built Salesforce actions and maybe some Bolt development in Slack. Um, and then it's an MCP that really is like the nucleus of your enterprise. Like I said during the demo, it's your rules of engagement for your sales team. It's, plugged into maybe your data warehouse, your existing data to be able to understand what's standard versus non-standard, what's normal versus not normal, what's a deal look like for a customer of this segment so that it's not making recommendations for an SMB customer that are like enterprise, all these different things, right? And that is something that we are typically seeing revenue operations teams own because they're so connected to the data, the sources, all these types of things, right? But it can vary depending on, the culture of the company.
Yeah,
Okay.
and from the continuous side, for to answer that question, we typically see RevOps owning, the actual integration because it's pre-built and it's very easy and simple to modify those mappings. And then from the finance side, that's typically going to be, a controller who's receiving all of that booking data that comes from Salesforce Agentforce Revenue Management and kind of running that revenue recognition process and managing revenue allocations and things like that.
Okay. Well, I think you guys have some inspired attendees because there is a request for all APIs in a document and an implementation guide. So if you guys can just spit out everything that you've put into your LLM and share it, I think everyone would appreciate that.
I can say from a from an API perspective, there's what the nice thing about Revenue Cloud is, again, that stack of APIs, that's all in the developer documentation. And so what we do when we develop this for our customers is we go to that documentation, we build a knowledge base out of it, and that is really what you know, the initial layer that gets added into that MCP is here's how you interact with Revenue Cloud in every possible facet, right? And we fine tune that so it understands when to reach for this versus when to reach for that, right? Just kind of standard agentic development. And that is what can really, from day one, give you the ability to have something that's pretty high powered, that's platform agnostic, that can directly interact and transact in Revenue Cloud, for you and your users. But yeah, good requests. We can definitely put some of this together.
Yeah, I'd say from the continuous side, we definitely have some material and can kind of help with that. But we do partner closely with FullPress as a implementation partner for continuous control. So happy to answer any questions that way, and feel free to reach out directly to us as well.
Awesome. Well, we're at time, fellas, but I think this was an awesome session. And anyone who's looking to connect with Full Press, Keenan's information is on the screen, and their website is obviously the domain. Same with Thane, and that's continuoustech.com. So we'll be sending the recording in a follow-up email. And again, you guys know how to get in touch, and we look forward to connecting with you further. Have a great day, all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye.